Hi everyone, and welcome to yet another D&D Horror Stories with D&D Doge. Sometimes in games like Dungeons & Dragons, heavy topics can be tackled by engaging players, but sometimes no one wants to deal with those issues and just have a fun fantasy romp. Though the player in this following story apparently wanted to force the issue, quite literally. To the post. I've had enough with being effed raw. By Reddit user, The Reluctant Link. So this happened about a year ago now, and the campaign that it was part of is nearing its conclusion. So I decided to post the one bump along an otherwise great campaign. My group was playing a campaign that I mostly stole from Tyranny of Dragons. We started with 6 players, a gnome bard obsessed with ducks, an orc warrior raised by goblins that doesn't realize he's an orc, a gym bro dragonborn paladin, the paladin squire, kobold sorcerer, and then the problem player character, who was basically Warlock Aladdin, and his friend who was a desert ranger that worshipped dragons. Honestly, everything went pretty well for a few months. Everyone was having fun, and there were no issues. The group develops their quirks listed above, minus the problem player, that had his quirk all set out on day 1, until they reach the first major city, and the problem player says he wants a classy, exotic courtesan. I'm not against any sort of NPC romances, unless I have to roleplay them, which I told them all on day 1, and reminded him. He says he doesn't want to roleplay with me, just have some background fluff, and continue building up his character as a faux noble. So I say that's fine. We'll treat her as a skilled hireling. He asks if he can do a lump sum, so I calculate a month's worth of wages and tell him so. He doesn't have enough, as he more or less has spent every gold he gets on whatever roadside magic trinket seller I have. Goofy, common magic items that have no real uses, though they found a pretty good use for a time-frozen rabbit as a trap detector. Well, that's a bit dark. What did he do? Throw the rabbit at traps to make them go off? He asks to borrow money, and his friend says, sure, no problem. The orc warrior does a bit of roleplay of him asking what the shinies are for, and giving him the rest. Then, the problem player asks how much it would be to get some gold fetters, fine tattered rags, and a gold chain so he can bind the courtesan up and drag her around to show that he, quote, owns her. Well, that went pretty dark pretty quickly, more so than the time-frozen rabbit. The group goes silent, and I shoot him WTF looks. The paladin pipes in that his character would not be comfortable with that. Orc Warrior says his character would, but he, the player, isn't. I tell him no. That makes people in the group and me uncomfortable, so I will not allow that. And in addition, they are in a state where slavery is illegal, punishable by death, and they will be stopped by every guard and knightly order they come across. He then quips that he'll have her sign a contract so it's not slavery. Well, not to steal a phrase from Rick and Morty, but that just sounds like slavery with extra steps. I tell him that it doesn't matter, and since she's a courtesan, that would hurt her reputation, so she would under no circumstances agree to that, outside of the bedroom. He puffs up and shoots, "She's a hooker," and I shoot back, "No, you said classy, exotic courtesan. She's not a back alley hooker that's desperate for money. Drop the outfit and pay the gold to hire her for a month, or drop her entirely and keep the gold." He says fine, and proceeds to describe her as basically Elf Jasmine, and the campaign continues without any issues for about 5 sessions, until they get to the next big city. He has her a couple of times, helping them sneak in an enemy wagon by distracting the guards, and we hit a month post-hiring her when the issue comes back. We start up the session, and as we are waiting for the paladin to show up, I'm mostly doing some bookkeeper stuff, finding out what areas the party may want to visit. And I remind the problem player that it's been an in-game month, and ask him if he wants me to do a monthly pay rate, or go to weekly, since we are now in a segment of the campaign where there's less travel and time skipping. He goes off saying he doesn't need to pay her as she has a contract. I say, yes, an employment contract. You have to pay employees or the contract is void. She's just a whore, he yells. I own her. Well, that took a turn. Who is this player playing? Andrew Tate? No, you do not. As I told you before, slavery is illegal. You have to pay, and we can do daily, weekly, or monthly pay. But if you want to keep her, then you have to pay her, I tell him. I'm not paying her, he says. I say, okay, then she goes off into the big city to get a job that pays. If you want, you can hire her at a later date. And I give a shrug. I've had enough with being effed raw, he seethes, as he slowly packs up his folder, and over like 5 minutes, tells his friend, the Desert Ranger, to grab his stuff so they can go. His friend says he'll hitch a ride later, that he's having fun in this campaign. I tell him that I'll give him a ride after the game, and the problem player storms out. The session continues without issue, other than the paladin not showing up since he couldn't get his car started. And the only lasting effect is the party seeking out to hire their courtesan as their head maid once they got a castle, and a long-running joke of when the dice gods are pissed off, someone shouting, I'm tired of being effed raw, and slowly putting those dice in jail. TLDR, middle-aged guy wants to roleplay his sex trafficking Aladdin fantasy, and it became a group meme. Well, at least it sounds like the trash took itself out in this case. I mean, what was he expecting? Just to have this woman who he hired to be with him to continue doing so after he ran out of money? I mean, sure, in a roleplay aspect, he could have had roleplay where the courtesan grew attached to his character and that she just wanted to be with him. But I'm pretty sure someone with the idea of having her in chains to act as a slave, that wouldn't be in the realm of possibilities. But in all seriousness, it is good to hear that this player wasn't able to strong-arm his friend into also quitting the campaign, and that the group has since turned this whole ordeal into an inside joke when it comes to rolling badly. But with that, let's continue on to the next story, where a dungeon master and a player don't realize that sometimes in-game jokes can affect some players. To the post. I'm so sorry, dude. By Reddit user WumpyBrian2000. So this was a much bigger horror story when it happened, but several years ago in college, I was running a game of 5th edition for some friends of mine. One day, a couple of them asked me if their friend Mark could come play for a session, and I said, hell yeah, have him make a character. The tone of the campaign was pretty balanced, so he decided to make an edgelord rogue with a really tragic backstory about his mom dying after taking care of him for years, and him becoming a thief to support her. I said, F yeah, let's do this. Now, this campaign did have a couple of joke characters. One of them, my players referred to as the your mum guy. He was a dwarf with a very heavy Scots accent, as you do, who constantly made your mom jokes. He'll become important. We were about an hour into the game, and Mark was doing great, really committing to role-playing his character, and they eventually stumble onto the your mum guy during their jaunt through town, which means that he, also me, the DM, start cracking your mom jokes. Everyone else just riffs with me, but this guy keeps looking hurt and offended every time one of these jokes comes out. And I'm thinking, wow, this guy is really good. I'm super excited to have him. He's really leaning into his backstory. Then he got up and walked away from the table and into the bathroom. And it's only at this point that one of the others informs me that Mark's mom had died about 2 weeks previously in real life. His character was loosely based on him. I felt so effing bad. I went to talk to him, and I apologized profusely and explained that I hadn't known and that I thought he was just really into the roleplay. He told me it was fine, and he finished the session, but he also declined to come back. Mark, if you're out there, bro, I'm so sorry once again. Well, first, I should say to OP that you shouldn't beat yourself up too much over this whole situation. OP had no idea about this player's personal life, and was just playing the game as usual. Heck, even when this player was showing signs of the jokes making him uncomfortable, I can see why OP would see that as role-playing. Because some people, when they are role-playing, will show the physical attributes of what their character is doing, or even how they feel. So I can't blame OP for that either. If anything, the player that informed OP about this new player's mom dying weeks before should have informed OP and the player that would make the "your mom" jokes before the game, not wait until it happened and then inform them afterwards. So again, I would say to OP, don't beat yourself up too much over this. People deal with death in different ways, but I will say that transferring your feelings into a D&D character probably is not the healthiest ways to deal with that. Heck, when my dad died last year, I told my group that I still wanted to play that week, because I needed anything at that point in time to just take me out of the real world, if only for a few hours. So yeah, I don't think there is any quote-unquote bad guy in this story, just a set of circumstances that led to a bad conclusion. But with that, I think it's time that we have a kitty cleanse our mind palates from those previous stories. But this time, I thought I would do something a little different and feature a viewer's kitty to tackle that job. So with that, here is Sweet Ivy having a romp while her owner enjoys one of my videos. Well, Sweet Ivy certainly seems like a funny kitty, and I think that she deserves a like. What do you think? And if you would like me to feature one of your pets in a future video, you can always contact me via Twitter. And also, just saying, Ko-fi and Ko-fi links are in the description, if you would like to go that route. But with that cute kitty, let's get to today's final story, where a dungeon master tries to enlist new players to continue a campaign that went defunct. To the post. Dungeon Master tries to force past campaign onto new players. By Reddit user Jugo Zero. My name is Zero, and a few months ago, I had an experience that started out annoying and turned truly horrible. Due to my personal and work situation, I usually look for tabletop RPGs to play online. In January, I applied for a D&D game with a steampunk and zombie theme. The idea seemed fantastic, and when my application was accepted, I was really excited. The Dungeon Master, who I'll call Duche, contacted me on Discord to get to know me better, which is pretty common when you're looking to play online. During our conversation, I noticed he might be on the spectrum. I don't mean to judge anyone, but there's some context here for later. At the time, the conversation seemed to go well. He said he liked my answers and would be delighted to have me in his game. I was happy to be accepted and excited to meet the other players. After that, a few days passed until the game date arrived. It was me and 3 other players, myself, another guy, and 2 girls. This was the session 0, where we were supposed to define characters, backstories, and things like that. At least, that's what we thought. The other players and I hit it off as soon as we met. Only a few minutes had passed, and we were already making jokes amongst ourselves. Douchey, strangely, remained silent while we introduced ourselves until he just said, "Okay, choose which character you want to play." The other players and I fell silent for a second. You see, when I submitted my application on the site where I was looking for players, it said I could create my own character. In fact, one of the players commented on that, saying that they already had an idea of the character they wanted to make. Doge said that was an option, but that these characters were already at an advanced level and had magic items. But if we played ones we made ourselves, we'd have to start at level 1. We didn't think much of it at the time, so we decided to see what characters he had. We noticed there were 5 characters, 2 rogues, a paladin, a cleric, and a barbarian, all with their race and equipment already chosen, and curiously, with very elaborate backstories, a page per character. I usually choose wizards, so none of them appealed to me, nor to any of the other players, so we told him that we preferred to create our own characters. Doge started making loud mouth sounds, and then said with a dismissive tone, "Whatever you want, your loss." That gesture was a premonition of what was to come. He spent the rest of that session silent. We would discuss possible stories of how our characters could meet, but he didn't pay any attention to us. I even think at some point I could hear him watching TV in the background. In the end, the last thing he said was that he would see us in a week, and that was it. He didn't tell us how the game would start, or what he expected from us. One of the other players is autistic, and mentioned that she noticed similar patterns in Doge, so she told us not to get too bothered by him. Maybe that's just how he communicates. By the way, I'm not an expert on these topics or anything. I'm just recounting what we talked about at the time. Well, the first day of the game arrived, and we were excited to start. That's when Doge said, "Okay, as you recall, you were in Lord Festus's cave when..." Suddenly, he starts telling this story that our characters were already in a cave, facing a lord who had escaped our invasion of his castle. The other players and I were surprised. We had never done that. We even joked that we didn't remember our characters doing that in Session 0. Though again, Doge used that arrogant tone and said, "It was all in the backstory of the pre-made characters." We mentioned that, since we chose to make our own characters, we hadn't read those backstories, and he never told us that we had to. He just said that it was all fine, just to follow the story, and everything would make sense. We just decided to play along. Though the thing is, as soon as we started the game, we tried to pretend that our characters were meeting for the first time. My character approached another one, saying, "Yeah, I'm just a mercenary looking for that Lord Festus's bounty." Immediately, Doge got agitated and said, "That's not how it goes. You faced him in the castle, and you already know each other." That felt awkward. We tried to roleplay getting to know each other a couple more times, but he would just interrupt and say, "That doesn't make sense. You already knew each other." Despite everything, we kept playing for a few minutes. Curiously, we failed all the first rolls we made, because for some reason, the skill level was higher than that of our characters. We didn't know why until the first battle came. There were 3 beasts that destroyed us in a couple of turns. It was literally a TPK in the first session. When we asked Doge why, he replied that the cave was level 8, and those beasts were of that level. One of the players got annoyed and asked him why he put us in that challenge if he knew that we were level 1. He just said, "If you had chosen the characters I showed you, this wouldn't have happened." That annoyed all of us. We asked him why, if he wanted to do it with the pre-made characters, why didn't he tell us that it was mandatory from the beginning? He said it wasn't, that we had the freedom to choose. But then we asked him why he started the story this way if it wasn't mandatory. That's when he mentioned, "Because the story is already advanced." At this point, we decided to ask why all of this was happening. It didn't seem like he wanted to play the campaign he told us about. He told us the reason for this was that he had started this campaign 2 years ago, that he had played with other players who had made the characters Doge wanted to give us. Though the thing is, for whatever reason, they could no longer continue playing. But he wanted to continue the story, as not finishing it affected him greatly. At this point, he sounded increasingly uncomfortable, as if talking about this negatively affected him. One of the other players asked for a moment to speak with us separately, and he went to the bathroom. The player told us that Doge had some kind of compulsion, that perhaps he needed to continue the story because not doing so affected him. She told us that, at least for this session, maybe we should go along with him. By the time he came back, we agreed to play with his characters. By that point, the mood had really dropped, but we didn't want to end on bad terms with him. I chose the cleric because I wanted to play someone who cast spells, though suddenly, Doge started making those uncomfortable mouth sounds again. He said that only a woman could play that character. I told him if it bothered him, that I could just change the character's gender, but he blurted out with a resounding, "No!" Not wanting any more problems, I just said, "Okay, fine," and switched to one of the rogues. We started the cave again. About 20 minutes passed when Doge said something like, "Alright, rogue, in this section of the cave, it's just you and the cleric. Anything you want to say to your beloved?" Even on a Discord call, I could feel the other player and I exchanging a look that said, "What?" Apparently, both characters were lovers in the previous game. I usually don't have problems with character romances, if the players consent. But the thing is, the other player was aromantic. In fact, she had mentioned in Session 0 that she didn't want her character to have any romance. Doge started pointing out that it was part of the role because it was in her character's backstory, and that they had lived for a long time to be together. The player insisted that she didn't like that, and I agreed with her, that he couldn't impose that on someone. But Doge kept getting more upset, saying that's not how role-playing works, that that's not how the characters behaved. The other player got very annoyed, to the point where he raised his voice at Doge, saying, "Look, the problem is, we are not those players. If you have an advanced story with new players, why don't you start the story over and let us play it our own way?" That agitated Doge. He started yelling, "I don't want to. It's my game, and you don't want to play it the way I want." The call didn't have video, but we started hearing him throw things, and I could swear I heard something made out of glass break. Throughout that process, we only heard, "It's my game, my game." Though suddenly, we heard someone enter his room. It was a feminine voice, perhaps a woman in her 50s. We heard her trying to grab him and ask him to calm down, and he just kept yelling, "My game!" Everything happened very fast, but at one point, all of us collectively left the call. Well, after that, the players and I stayed in contact. Thanks to one of them, we managed to play another steampunk-themed game, but with a different DM, of course. To date, we've been playing for several months. I'm writing this remembering that story, because recently, Doge contacted one of the players, saying he felt bad about what happened, and that if we wanted to play with him again, we could. Though, to this day, she does not want to reply to his message. And honestly, neither would I. I hope Doge has found a healthy way to finish his story, or that he started a different game. But yes, that's my RPG horror story. At least the one I'm willing to share for now. Well, that certainly had to be an experience. Something does tell me that perhaps Doge had some sort of compulsion to finish that campaign, since he wasn't able to do so due to the game falling apart previously, and wanted his new players to fill in the roles that his previous players abandoned. Could he have been on the spectrum? Sure, it certainly seemed that way. Though I would say that it would also be mixed with a bit of OCD, as I know from experience, since I have that condition. And sometimes when things aren't finished, that can really take a toll. Though that doesn't mean his new players should have had to take on the role of his previous players. Heck, if it really bothered him that much, he could have made the story that his old player characters failed at their quest. and that the new player characters came in to pick up the pieces and continue. But the fact that OP said that they heard things breaking over the voice chat and an older lady trying to stop the DM just tells me that this DM had some major issues. And I don't blame OP or the other players for not wanting to deal with all that just to play Dungeons & Dragons. But at the same time, I am with OP here, and wishing that the DM was able to somehow finish the story that he wanted to tell, and is in a better position now. Though, that is all I have for you today. As always, I appreciate all of you, and hope that your games remain horror story free. Until next time.